him, but maybe behind his back. Or if you said it at all, maybe you smiled when you said it, like that line from all these old Westerns. Nabal means fool, or maybe more precisely in our lingo, nut job. But in any event, he is married to a woman named Abigail. She was an intelligent and beautiful woman, but her husband was surly and mean in his dealings. He was a Calebite. This kind of looks like, as we go into chapter 25 in 1 Samuel, this looks like a case of opposites attract, maybe. More precisely, Abigail probably, or Nabal for that matter, didn't have much say in the marriage. Keep in mind, in the culture of the day, marriages were arranged sometimes at childbirth. And so, who you grew up with, or maybe you didn't even grow up with the other person, but your parents worked this thing out where, hey, when you hit a certain age, you two are going to get married. That might have been the situation here. You can't really get a feel for how these two really just, hey, yeah, Nabal may be a fool. He may say and do the darndest things, but I love the guy. I love how he makes those Mickey Mouse pancakes on Saturday mornings. Just probably not. This was, if Abigail had her druthers, she'd probably be married to someone else. But this is life in that day and age and in that culture. So you got Nabal the fool, you got Abigail intelligent and beautiful, and all those qualities are going to come into play in a moment. Verse 4, while David was in the wilderness, he heard that Nabal was shearing sheep. So he sent 10 young men on a message. And he said to them, go up to Nabal at Carmel, greet him in my name, say to him, long life to you, good health to you and your household, and good health to all that is yours. Now I hear that it is sheep shearing time. Sheep shearing time? That big deal? Oh, yeah. It's kind of, it's the equivalent, or as close to equivalent as could be in our culture, of Christmas, where everybody is happy, everybody is in a generous mood, especially in that economy where you just wait for this one moment where you shear the wool off the sheep and you sell it and you make the big bucks, and everybody's happy because the sheep owners make a lot of money. They can buy a lot of stuff, and especially with food and liquor and all this other stuff. And when you got those things, you kind of celebrate. Hey, it's been a good year. Let's party. And another aspect of the sheep shearing and this part of the economy was the lack of local community police. You got shepherds and you got your flocks out in the fields, and if you're not careful, you got these nomadic tribes that'll come in and raid your flock, steal the sheep, maybe do something worse like kill the shepherds. So one way that a lot of traveling groups, nomadic tribes who really aren't in there to kill or marauder or steal, but hey, let's do something legitimate and benefit ourselves as well, as we'll look out. We'll help you look after your sheep, after your flocks. We'll take care of them for you. We'll take care of you. If there are any bad guys, bad actors out there who look like they're fixing to do something bad, we're going to take care of them. We're going to run them off so that you don't have to worry about losing anything, either in the way of sheep or personnel. And that was pretty standard operation. And of course, these protectors were not paid by the week or anything like that. They just kind of kept a running account through the season until shearing time. And then when the sheep had been sheared, money has been paid, the sheep owners are flush with cash and everything, and with food and all the other stuff, that's when they come in and kind of present a bill for our services. Pretty standard operation for this economy. David's part of that. Why not? He's out in the wilderness. He's hiding from Saul, he and his men. Got to make a living somehow. Got to put food on the table, such as it is, not only for them but for the family members that accompany these David's soldiers. So David becomes a protector. David and his men, they protect Nabal's sheep and his men, his sheep herders. And so it's time to collect. It's time to collect or to earn or to pick up what David feels is rightly his for services rendered. Verse 7, he says, I hear it's sheep shearing time. When your shepherds were with us, we didn't mistreat them. And the whole time they were at Carmel, nothing of theirs was missing. Ask your own servants, and they will tell you. Therefore, be favorable toward my men, since we come at a festive time. And even so, as David's men come with this message, they can probably see some celebration going on, eating, drinking, having fun, telling jokes, whatever, playing games on the big video screen. All is well, all is happy. So life is good, celebrations going on. David's men are just saying, hey, we'd like a little bit of what you're spreading and sharing with everybody else. Please give your servants and your son David. David, of course, technically not a son. This is basically saying, I'm your humble servant here. Give us whatever you can find for them. Reasonable request after all this time and after all that David and his men have done for him. When David's men arrived, they gave Nabal this message in David's name. Then they waited. There are some translations of this passage that say they actually sat down because they figured, hey, yeah, Nabal's a pretty good guy. He'll do what any other landowner or sheep owner would do, and share the wealth. And so they maybe even sit down and wait for what they think will be a positive response. Not so much. Verse 10, Nabal answered David's servants, who is this David? Who is this son of Jesse? Well, if he knows who David's dad is, he knows who David is. Many servants are breaking away from their masters these days. Why should I take my bread and water and the meat I have slaughtered from my shearers and give it to men coming from who knows where? We're seeing a little bit about Nabal's character here. He is picking a fight. He has deliberately insulted David and his men. And he knows better. Even if he wasn't paying attention to what was going on with his flocks and with the shepherds and so forth, he had to know that someone was helping take care of his assets for him. And he should be grateful for that. This is the height of ungratefulness. And basically, he's kicking the servants out without anything. Go away. And, just for good measure, no physical altercations, but he does what's the equivalent of taking somebody's nose and tweaking it, twisting it until it's bleeding. He's being provocative. Verse 12, David's men turned around and went back. When they arrived, they reported every word. David said to his men, each of you strap on your sword. So they did, and David strapped his on as well. The response from David here, obviously not the answer David expected. Obviously, David's upset, but obviously David's response here is over the top. This is not the godly response, especially one who's going to be future king of Israel, in terms of an insult or whatever. Basically, he tells his men, lock and load, babies. We're going after this guy. About 400 men went up with David, while 200 stayed with the supplies. Of course, nothing like this goes unnoticed. So one of Nabal's servants runs and tells Abigail, Nabal's wife, David sent messengers from the wilderness to give our master his greetings, but he hurled insults at them. Yet these men were very good to us. They did not mistreat us. And the whole time we were out in the fields near them, nothing was missing. Night and day, they were a wall around us the whole time we were herding our sheep near them. Now, think it over and see what you can do, because disaster is hanging over our master and his whole household. He is such a wicked man that no one can talk to him. Abigail, help! We got trouble in our hands. We got trouble in River City, only they don't have a river there. You know, it starts with a D, and his name is David. He is coming after us. The servants know what's going to happen. They know that anyone who would behave in such a manner was inviting some kind of repercussion, and it's on the way. Well, Abigail doesn't have to be told twice. Verse 18, she acted quickly. She took 200 loaves of bread, 2 skins of wine, 5 dressed sheep, 5 seahs of roasted grain, 100 cakes of raisins, and 200 cakes of pressed figs, loaded them on donkeys. Then she told her servants, "Go ahead, I'll follow you." But she did not tell her husband Nabal. Now, some commentators take Abigail to task about this. "Oh, Abigail, how can you be a faithful wife and not inform him?" Well, in all likelihood, if Nabal knew what Abigail was about to do, he would have said, "Don't do it. I forbid you to leave." And in any event, what Abigail is doing is trying to save his neck, not only his, but the collective necks of their household. So they're on their way to meet David. As she came riding her donkey into a mountain ravine, there were David and his men descending toward her, and she met them. David had just said, "It's been useless, all my watching over this fellow's property in the wilderness, so that nothing of his was missing. He has paid me back evil for good." And look at this oath that he utters. "May God deal with David, be it ever so severely, if by morning I leave alive one male of all who belong to him." That's a really, really rash oath. But that shows you how angry David is. He is so angry, he's not thinking clearly. When Abigail saw David, she quickly got off her donkey and bowed down before David with her face to the ground. She fell at his feet and said, and look at this response. This is the height of diplomacy and tact. It's Abigail's pitch to David here. It can be divided into 2 parts. We're looking at the first part here. It's a big fat apology. She fell at David's feet, verse 24, and said, "Pardon your servant, my lord, and let me speak to you. Hear what your servant has to say. Please pay no attention, my lord, to that wicked man, Nabal. He is just like his name. His name means fool, and folly goes with him. And as for me, your servant, I did not see the men my lord sent. And now, my lord, as surely as the Lord your God lives, and as you live, since the Lord has kept you from bloodshed and from avenging yourself with your own hands, may your enemies and all who are intent on harming my lord be like Nabal. And let this gift which your servant has brought to my lord be given to the men who follow you." That's part 1. Big fat I'm sorry. Here's part 2, where she does a little prophesying. "Please forgive your servant's presumption. The Lord your God will certainly make a lasting dynasty for my Lord, because you fight the Lord's battles, and no wrongdoing will be found in you as long as you live. Even though someone is pursuing you to take your life, the life of my Lord will be bound securely in the bundle of the living." I love that phrase. Your life will be bound securely in the bundle of the living. The life of my Lord will be bound securely by the Lord your God, but the lives of your enemies he'll hurl away as from the pocket of a sling. Ooh, that's a little image there that David can identify with. When the Lord has fulfilled for my Lord every good thing he promised concerning him, and has appointed him ruler over Israel, my Lord will not have on his conscience the staggering burden of needless bloodshed, or of having avenged himself. And also, by the way, unspoken, but probably just as relevant, if David actually carried through with his threat to murder the entire household of Nabal, That would have given Saul a legitimate reason to continue to pursue him and hunt him down and kill him. Hey, I'm chasing a murderer. I'm chasing a guy who wiped out, da 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 da. And we got to get him, or who knows who else he's going to kill. Anyway, when the Lord your God has brought my Lord success, remember your servant. Well, Abigail's little speech has the desired effect. Good thing. Verse 32, David said to Abigail, "Praise be to the Lord, the God of Israel, who has sent you today to meet me. May you be blessed for your good judgment and for keeping me from bloodshed this day and from avenging myself with my own hands. Otherwise, as surely as the Lord, the God of Israel, lives, who has kept me from harming you, if you had not come quickly to meet me, not one male belonging to Nabal would have been left alive by daybreak." David has had time to think through, step back, reconsider all the threats and his murderous intents, and he's stepping back. He's not going to do what he promised to do. Then David accepted from her hand what she had brought him and said, "Go home in peace. I've heard your words and granted your request." When Abigail went to Nabal, he was in the house holding a banquet like that of a king. He was just basically nothing, no cost was being spared at his celebration. Not only that, he was in high spirits and very drunk. So she told him nothing at all until daybreak. Then in the morning, when Nabal was sober, and maybe with a little bit of a hangover, you think, his wife told him all these things. "Hey, honey, I just saved your neck that David was fixing to break. You still got your head on your shoulders, and it's still attached." Well, for whatever reason, this is bad news for Nabal. It's a shock to the system. His heart failed him, and he became like a stone. Gee, sounds like either a massive heart attack or a massive stroke, maybe both. Really doesn't matter. This is something that's been arranged by God. Because about 10 days later, the Lord struck Nabal, and he died. When David heard that Nabal was dead, he said, "Praise be to the Lord who has upheld my cause against Nabal for treating me with contempt. He has kept his servant from doing wrong and brought Nabal's wrongdoing down on his own head." David has just learned an object lesson in behaving in a godly fashion and not letting his emotions get carried away. He's also seen a vivid object lesson of what God meant when he said, "I will take care of things for you." Do not pay people back. Do not presume to take vengeance on yourself. "Vengeance is mine. I will repay," says the Lord. And that's out of the Mosaic law. And indeed, this is what God does, what God has done. God will administer justice in his own way and time. And basically, it's a little picture here, a little tableau of what eventually awaits Saul. So David, being a perceptive young man, has learned an important lesson. Then David sent word to Abigail, asking her to become his wife. His servants went to Carmel and said to Abigail, "David has sent us to you to take you to become his wife." She bowed down with her face to the ground and said, "I am your servant and am ready to serve you and will wash the feet of my Lord's servants." Abigail quickly got on a donkey and, attended by her 5 female servants, went with David's messengers and became his wife. David had also married Ahinoam of Jezreel, and they both were his wives. Remember, this is back in the day when there wasn't a strict one man, one woman kind of marriage relationship. It was what it was. So David has 2 wives. Actually, he had 3, but something has happened to Michal, Saul's daughter. Saul has given her to Paltiel, son of Laish, who is from Galim. So basically, Saul has played divorce court and divorced David and Michal, or at least in his own mind. As we go into chapter 26. David continues to be on the run. And once again, those wonderful Ziphites who earlier sold David out, hey, King Saul, we know where David is. We can give him up to you. They're at it again. They went to Saul at Gibeah, Saul's home base, and said, is not David hiding on the hill of Hachilah, which faces Jeshimon? So Saul went down to the desert of Ziph. There he goes again. So much for his earlier pledge that, hey, I won't harm you, David. Come on back. It'll be like old times. Not so much. Saul's strapping on his sword, and he's going after David one more time with his 3,000 select Israelite troops, by the way, to search for David. Saul made his camp beside the road on the hill of Hachilah, facing Jeshimon, but David stayed in the wilderness. When he saw that Saul had followed him there, he sent out scouts and learned that Saul had definitely arrived. Then David set out and went to the place where Saul had camped. He saw where Saul and Abner, son of Ner, the commander of Saul's army, had lain down. Saul was lying inside the camp with the army encamped around him. Saul was, at least theoretically, well protected. David, at his spy spot, can look down and see where he is. Verse 6, David then asked Ahimelech the Hittite and Abishai, son of Zeruiah, Joab's brother, who will go down into the camp with me to Saul? I'll go with you, said Abishai. So David and Abishai went to the army by night, and there was Saul lying asleep inside the camp with his spear stuck in the ground. That spear that Saul has so much trouble aiming with any kind of accuracy. But there it is. And Abner and the soldiers were lying around him. Abishai said to David, oh man, here's your chance, buddy. Today God has delivered your enemy into your hands. Now let me pin him to the ground with one thrust of the spear. Not just any spear, but the Saul's spear that's laying by his head. Abishai is saying, this is great. God, you don't even have to worry about it, David. I'll do it for you. This is a gift from God. And I'll take care of it. I'll kill him. I won't have to strike him twice. David said to Abishai, don't destroy him. Who can lay a hand on the Lord's anointed and be guiltless? As surely as the Lord lives, he said, the Lord himself will strike him. Abishai said, it's not our call. It's not our decision to kill Saul. God will take care of it. And he'll take care of it in one of three ways. As surely as the Lord lives, David said, the Lord himself will strike him, or his time will come and he will die, or he will go into battle and perish. So God will take him out on his own timetable, or he'll die of natural causes, or one of these battles that he'll go in, he'll get killed. But the Lord forbid that I should lay a hand on the Lord's anointed. Now get the spear and the water jug that are near his head and let's go. So David took the spear and water jug near Saul's head, and they left. No one saw or knew about it, nor did anyone wake up. They were all sleeping because the Lord, who is not a passive actor here, this is not a coincidental issue, the Lord is helping David out by putting Saul and his men into a deep sleep, so that David and his companion can go into the center of Saul's encampment, into the belly of the beast, so to speak, and have this little conversation, take this little action, take the spear and the water jug, sneak back out in all safety. Verse 13, David crossed over to the other side, stood on top of the hill some distance away. There was a wide space between them. He called out to the army and to Abner, son of Ner, aren't you going to answer me, Abner? Abner replied, who are you, and who calls the king? David said, you're a man, aren't you? And who is like you in Israel? Why didn't you guard your lord the king? Someone came to destroy your lord the king. what you have done is not good. As surely as the Lord lives, you and your men must die. You and your men deserve to die because you did not guard your master, the Lord's anointed. Look around you. Where are the king's spear and water jug that were near his head?" Once again, Saul recognizes David's voice and said, "Same song, second verse, just like the first. Could have been worse. Is that your voice, David, my son?" David replied, "Yes, it is, my lord the king." And yes, this is almost a word-for-word replay of the earlier encounter. But basically, David adds, "Why is my lord pursuing his servant? What have I done, and what wrong am I guilty of? Now let my lord the king listen to his servant's words. If the Lord has invited you against me, or incited you, against me, if you're pursuing me for just cause, if God has put it into your heart to chase me down, then may he accept an offering. If, however, people have done it, if you've been listening to people and the rumor on the street, Saul hasn't, of course. This is all in his head, but David's offering him a faith-saving way out. Hey, if there's been misinformation, there's been fake news, as a certain person today likes to say, if you've been listening to that fake news channel, may they be cursed before the Lord. They've driven me today from my share in the Lord's inheritance and have said, go serve other gods. Saul, you have put me, or the people that you're listening to have put me in an untenable position. I actually, not only can I not worship the Lord as he commands, I'm being forced to serve other gods. Now, do not let my blood fall to the ground far from the presence of the Lord. The Lord is our witness in terms of what is about to happen. The king of Israel has come out to look for a flea, as one hunts a partridge in the mountains. What's that a reference to? Well, that's how they hunted partridges or other birds in the day. They would, birds can fly, so you would scare the birds, and they would fly from one tree to another tree. You'd scare them again, they'd fly somewhere else, and you'd keep on doing this. And eventually the birds would get tired, and they wouldn't fly away. And when they got to that point of exhaustion, then you can basically club them, kill them, collect them. David says, that's the way you're hunting me. You're wearing me out, man. You need to stop it. Then Saul said, I have sinned. Come back, David, my son, because you considered my life precious today. I will not try to harm you again. Oh, sorry. Editorial opinion there. Surely I have acted like a fool and have been terribly wrong. That's true. Here's the king's spear, David answered. Let one of your young men come over and get it. The Lord rewards everyone for their righteousness and faithfulness. The Lord delivered you into my hands today, but I would not lay a hand on the Lord's anointed. I've done the right thing, Saul. As surely as I valued your life today, so may the Lord value my life and deliver me from all trouble. Then Saul said to David, May you be blessed, David, my son. You will do great things and surely triumph. So David went on his way. Saul returned home. For all we know, this is their last meeting between David and Saul. As we go into chapter 27. Victory for David, but look at what happens as we open chapter 27. But David thought to himself, one of these days I will be destroyed by the hand of Saul. The best thing I can do is to escape to the land of the Philistines. Then Saul will give up searching for me anywhere in Israel, and I will slip out of his hand. It's interesting when you read the commentaries on this, there's big discussion, big disagreement. What's going on here, David? One group says, hey, David's doing this because God tells him to. Well, maybe so. It seems like if David was acting on the advice or the order of God, That would be made very, very clear here. So that leads a second group of commentators to say what David has done here, or what David is having, is a crisis of faith. Despite everything that God has done for him, despite everything that God has done to sustain and protect him, David is taking his eyes off God, and he's looking at his current circumstances, and he's panicking. And he's saying, sooner or later, Saul's going to get me. That's despite every assurance that God has given him. So what does he do? He makes a human decision. He makes, and based on the situation around him, he says, I'm better off in the land of the Philistines, my country's mortal enemies. So David and the 600 men with him left and went over to Achish, son of Maoch, king of Gath. Does any of these names sound familiar? Yeah. This is where David has visited before. He and Achish probably are on a first-name basis. And the first go-round didn't go so well. You had David basically having to feign insanity to avoid capture or to escape from people who would have held him prisoner. So he could get away. But things have changed. David and his men settled in Gath with Achish. Each man had his family with him. David had his 2 wives, Ahinoam of Jezreel and Abigail of Carmel, the widow of Nabal. So you got this big movement coming in. And Achish, in his way of thinking, says, things have changed between me and David. Last time, that didn't work out so well, but I'm willing to wipe that off the books for 2 reasons. Number 1, David and Saul are mortal enemies. Word has gotten back. And hey, what they say, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. David doesn't look so bad. And besides, he has brought these 600 warriors, these 600 mercenaries. They could come in handy. So they settle. David and his soldiers and their families. And his move to the Philistines has the desired effect with regard to Saul. Verse 4, when Saul was told that David had fled to Gath, he no longer searched for him. Then David said to Achish, if I found favor in your eyes, let a place be assigned to me in one of the country towns, so that I may live there. Why should your servant live in the royal city with you and just be constantly underfoot? Me and my men would just be getting in the way of what you want to do. Also, if David's in another city, he can go off and do whatever he wants to outside of the king's supervision. So on that day, Achish gave him Ziklag, and it has belonged to the kings of Judah ever since. Ziklag, basically a town close to the southern edge of the Israeli border. So he's basically, it's a border town and vulnerable to raids and all sorts of bad stuff from nomadic tribes. So Achish says, may not be a bad idea to send David and his men down there, fortify our strength there. So David moves there, and he lived in Philistine territory 1 year and 4 months. Now David and his men went up and raided the Geshurites, the Girzites, and the Amalekites. Remember our little episode with the Amalekites and Saul. So in a weird way, David is doing cleanup work for what Saul should have done and failed to do. From ancient times, these people had lived in the land extending to Shur in Egypt. Whenever David attacked an area, he did not leave a man or woman alive, but took sheep and cattle, donkeys and camels and clothes. Then he returned to Achish. When Achish asked, where'd you go raiding today? David would say, against the Negev of Judah, or against the Negev of Jeremiel, or against the Negev of the Kenites. He did not leave a man or woman alive to be brought to Gath, for he thought they might inform on us and say, this is what David did. And in David's reports to Achish, he's not out and out lying to him, but he's not being out and out honest to him either. He's kind of leaving, his response is rather ambiguous. So it leaves a lot of wiggle room so that Achish can believe what he wants to believe. And that has the desired effect. This was David's practice as long as he lived in Philistine territory. Achish trusted David and said to himself, he has become so obnoxious to his people, the Israelites. Yeah, he's going in there and all these raids. He's killing off his fellow Israelites. Well, no, he's not. And that's one reason why David is not taking any prisoners or leaving any survivors. He doesn't want anyone straggling back to King Achish and saying, this is what's really going on, or David will be in hot water. But for now, Achish believes that David is so obnoxious to his people, the Israelites, man, he's killing off his Israelite brothers, that he will be my servant for life. And then we end today's lesson by dipping into chapter 28 because it's part of the narrative, the story that we're looking at. Because we find out in the opening of chapter 28 that the Philistines are gathering their forces to fight against Israel. They're going to gang up on Israel with the intent of, we're going to take them out once and for all. There will never be anything or anyone called an Israelite again when we're through. And as part of those war plans, Achish said to David, you must understand that you and your men will accompany me in the army. We're going to battle, we're going to war with the Israelites, and you're going to be part of my team to take them out. Look at David's response. Again, very, very ambiguous. David said, then you will see for yourself what your servant can do. Achish replied, very well, I will make you my bodyguard for life. So as we enter our lesson today, David's in a quandary. He's on the wrong team. He's with the Philistines, the Israel's sworn enemy. And he's ducking and swerving as best as he can, but things are coming to a point where he's going to have to reveal himself sooner or later. Will he actually be a turncoat? Will actually be a traitor to his own country? Tune in next Sunday and find out. As we continue with chapter 28, in fact, we'll go through the end of 1 Samuel to the 31st chapter. So if you will read those chapters, that'll be our lesson for next Sunday, Lord willing. In the meantime, hey, those of you who've been praying for rain, I imagine you're hearing it right now. It's falling on the roof. That's great. Let's continue to pray for rain, erase that deficit, get us out of that drought. Thank you so much for your time and attention, and see you next Sunday.